Debbie Preece. Please share your love with her.
Thank you, Dean.
You are very welcome.
And let me know if this speaker is okay. I'm a little bit nervous coming up here to talk just because I don't have much experience speaking. And one thing that I've been so grateful for Unity is giving me opportunities to develop more confidence. Like I never led the songs before. I never sang before. I never played before. But through Unity, I started taking risks and which is totally welcome. And the same goes for you. Like if you'd like to get up here and sing or play an instrument or teach a class, this is the place to try out new things. Okay, so in keeping with the high standard of Dean, I decided that I needed to tell a joke. Well, it's actually two jokes because they're a little lame. Okay, all right. At a weekly Bible study, the leader asked an elderly gentleman, Walt, to open the meeting with prayer. Walt did so in a soft voice. Another man, straining to hear, shouted, "I can't hear you." Walt replied, "I wasn't talking to you." Here's the other one. In the foyer of a church, a young boy was looking at a plaque with the names of men and women who had died in various wars. He asked the pastor, "Who are these people?" The pastor said, "Those are members from our church who died in service." The boy worriedly asked, "The early service or the second service?" I spent a week to find some jokes. Again, I appreciate the opportunity to share today. My background is as a unificationist of the Reverend Moon's church that I joined when I was 20. But Unity accepts all religions and welcomes people of different faiths to come here and speak. So I'm going to be sharing some of those ideas today. Well, there's been, as many of you know, maybe some of you younger folks don't, because it was very well known in the 70s and the 80s, and there was a lot of controversy at that time. It was called, and there were newspaper articles flashed across the front page. It's a cult. He was brainwashing people. He had a massive financial empire, and there were these huge mass weddings, of which I'm proudly part of, because I was married with my husband with 2,000 couples, and we've been happily married for 41 years. So, thank you, everyone. So, I feel this strong calling, this mission to share the teachings in a similar way. Back in 2000, I started studying about marriage, and there was like all these things that had come out starting in the 80s about how to have a healthy marriage, and it's just like, wow, this stuff is so great. People need to to know about it. So that's how, that was one of the reasons that I got into marriage education and marriage counseling, and I still do marriage counseling. And in the same way, with the unification principles, there's just so much there that really are revolutionary, and they can change lives, and you will be surprised by some of the things that you hear. I hope you feel surprised today as well. So just a really quick overview of some of the ideas, because they cover a wide range of topics, such as, is there really a God? Are there any ways to understand who God really is? Or is God just a complete mystery? And how we grow spiritually closer to God? Is there any purpose to our lives? Or is life just a series of random events? Is there life after death? Or do we just disappear forever? And if there is life after death, what is our relationship to that next realm? Why is there so much suffering in the world? If there actually is a God who is all powerful, why doesn't she do something about this? Is history just a series of random events, or is it possible that history is being guided by God? And also, is it possible that God is working in a very powerful way right now, even though we see so many problems in the world, and wars and destruction and suffering all around us? Is it possible that God is working quietly in the background? So that's just a quick outline of some of the ideas, and I'm going to focus on one of the central ideas of unification, which explores the life of Jesus. And like I said, these are ideas that I'm sure most of you have never heard before. And there's a couple reasons for that. First of all, because Reverend Moon has been so unpopular, people just assumed, oh, there's nothing there, and just ignored it, rather than really asking people like myself, who are very close to the church and have been a member for many, many years, what's it really about? What do you really believe? And then the other reason, and this is very much in line with unity principles, is that when you become fixed on an idea and it becomes your reality, you become blinded to so many things. So what you see is what you get. But Jesus said to put on new wineskins. And I'm asking you also here to put on new wineskins. And I appreciate your meditation, asking people to really open their minds and open their hearts and to receive what you're meant to receive today. So, if you're so absolutely sure, many Christians are, that Jesus came to die, then you would be blinded to all the things in the Bible that point otherwise. And I'm going to show you some of those things. And also, the center of Christian's faith is on this idea of his death. And can you imagine challenging that when your very life, your eternal life, depends on that? So it's very hard to give up that belief unless you're able to open your eyes and see that there are so many things in the Bible that point otherwise. So why do Christians believe that Jesus came to die? Well, there was prophecies, and I'll read some of those. Prophecies in this section of the Bible talks about the servant's suffering. He was despised and rejected by men. He was wounded for our transgressions. He was oppressed and he was afflicted. Just many, many verses about he came to suffer. And even in Jesus' words, my mouth gets dry easily. I underline the first part of this sentence, just the first 3 words, and just kind of maybe keep this in the back of your mind. From that time, Jesus began to show his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer many things from the elders and chief priests and scribes, and be killed. And on the 3rd day he raised. And Peter took him and began to rebuke him, saying, God forbid, Lord, this shall never happen to you. But Jesus turned and said to Peter, Get behind me, Satan. You are a hindrance to me, for you are not on the side of God, but of man. So even in Jesus' words, at that time, from that time forward, he was saying that he had to die. That was so essential. He had to go that way. But then there's passages that show something different. You look at Isaiah 9, 6, 7. For us a child is born, to us a son is given, and the government will be upon his shoulder, and his name will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Of the increase of his government of peace there will be no end, upon the throne of David and over his kingdom, to establish it and to uphold it with justice and with righteousness from this time forth and forevermore. And also, there's other prophecy, there's other examples in the Bible after the angel appeared to Mary, and he spoke, and the angel spoke to Mary about her son that would be born. He will be great, and he will be called the Son of the Most High, and the Lord God will give to him the throne of his father David, and he will reign over the house of Jacob forever, and of his kingdom there will be no end. So we see that there's actually dual prophecies in the Bible. And there's one other point, and this is going to be an interpretation of, I'm sure you've never heard before. Actually, and this was in Jesus' prayer as well. In the Garden of Gethsemane, Matthew 26, 38 through 39, Jesus prayed, My Father, if it be possible, let this cup pass from me. He prayed that not only one time, he prayed it 3 times. Why did he pray such a prayer? Many Christians have interpreted this to mean, well, so we can relate to him that he's human, just like us. But Jesus was not like us at all. There was a reason that he prayed this way. And also, the other Christian martyrs, they never prayed this way. They didn't pray out of weakness. And even Peter said he wanted to be crucified upside down because he felt unworthy to be crucified like Jesus. So Jesus, do you think Jesus was any weaker than these martyrs? I don't think so. Jesus knew that if he died, that God's will could not be accomplished. at that time, which was God's purpose. He knew that if he died, he could not complete his mission that God had destined him for, to plant the seed for an ideal, loving world. Also, he foresaw the suffering of the early Christian martyrs, and he foresaw the suffering of the next 2,000 years of history. And then Jesus knew that he would have to come again. Whereas if he had lived, there's no need for him to come back. So why are there contradicting prophecies? It depends upon us. So many times, we're in situations where we can make a decision, the best decision or the more easy thing. You know, if we were all practiced the principles that the Dean teaches, you know, really looking at ourselves and looking at our relationship with God and checking things deeply, I don't think we'd make so many mistakes and wrong decisions. So, God gives two different prophecies, hoping for the best. But it's really our responsibility. It's up to us to turn to God, to have faith. So the unification belief is that the cross actually became an alternative course. You know, I'm someone, and I'm sure you guys are like this, don't believe that God does anything bad. But we know that so many bad things do take place. But I believe, and I think many of you believe also, when bad things happen, God is able to use that for good. And, you know, take the example of, you know, the mothers who lost their children to drunken driving, and then they created this great organization which has helped save so many lives. So unificationists believe that this was an alternative course. And so at that moment in time, then Jesus knew absolutely at that time, because there had been so many failures previously, that this was the only thing that he could do, and he had to die. And that's why he was so strict with Peter, who tried to stop him, because he knew absolutely that he had to die. And I believe that, you know, this belief that Jesus came to die, it has served its purpose very well for many, many years, for 2,000 years. So many people have benefited from his teachings and the example of his life, and have done so many great things. But now, we are living in a completely new age, and it requires something more, something that's more logical, that makes sense, that doesn't just ask us to just believe in Jesus or whatever it is. We need something that's logical, that makes sense, and to the intelligent people that we have today. And this is what the principle is. And this is all based on this. And I'm also, it's also what I'm teaching today is based on this book, Realizing Jesus, it's excellent. It goes into detail into Jesus's life, and he just really dug really deeply into the Bible. He was one of the top lecturers in our church, but he passed away last year, I believe. So what if Jesus had lived? He would have had so many more years to teach. He only had like 3 years. But what if he had his whole life to teach? We would have learned so many things. And what if he had actually married and actually had a family? We believe that this was God's purpose from the very beginning. And if you can imagine, Jesus, this person who's so connected to God, married to a Jesus-like woman, do you think there'd be any divorce? do you think there'd be any child abuse? Do you think we'd have all these problems in this world if the love of God dwelled in our lives in the deepest way, and we had the deepest security like Jesus did in our relationship with God, and knew the love of God in the most incredible and expansive way? So this was God's ideal from the very beginning. And when I heard this idea, it made sense to me, because I came from a dysfunctional family like many of us, and for a long time I blamed my parents, but then I was able to forgive them and love them once I understood God's love for me. But then I realized, well, they made mistakes. Well, but they made mistakes because their parents made mistakes, and then it goes all the way back. Just goes all the way back. All the way back to the garden. And you may not believe that story, that really happened, but even if it didn't, it's very symbolic of something. Otherwise, it wouldn't be there in the Bible. But when you think about it, in the very first family, a brother kills his brother. We never even hear about that in our own lives. A brother killing a brother. Where was Adam and Eve that this could have happened? They were so cut off from God that the first family, there was murder in the first family. So Jesus was not destined to die, but there was a series of failures going all the way back to his birth, going all the way back, that led to the point where there was no other option. I read this book a while back. It's called Inviting Disaster. And it talks about the Challenger disaster and the World Trade Towers collapsing. And it wasn't just like one thing, but it was just like all these things. It wasn't just like one person's fault, but it was like all these things that were going wrong. So then it collapsed. These things happened, and that's what happened in Jesus' life. And then I want to just quickly go over some of the important people in the Bible that contributed to this. I want to start with Zechariah. Zechariah was John the Baptist's father, and Elizabeth was his wife. And he received the revelation that his son would be great, that he would actually make the way straight for the Lord, and he would go before him in the spirit and the power of Elijah. And also Elizabeth had this revelation when Mary came there. Her baby just leapt and leaped in her womb, recognizing that this was a very, very special child was going to be born. But you know what happened? But you know what? We don't hear anything about Zechariah and Elizabeth. After that, they totally disappeared. What happened? You know, I have a theory about that. I don't know if I'll go into it right now, but they completely disappeared from the scene. And why did she have Jesus in a manger? Why didn't, they knew he was the high priest. They knew who Jesus was. And yet, were they there at the birth? No, and apparently they lived just a few miles from this barn. They were just completely absent, and they were absent from Jesus the rest of his life. But could you imagine, just something happened, a breakdown between these two families, between Zechariah and Elizabeth's family and Jesus' family. But if you could imagine, what if Mary had stayed there? Because John was his cousin. Jesus would have grown up together with John, and he would have been educated by the high priest. That's where he was meant to be raised up, not to become a carpenter's apprentice. He was meant to be raised in the temple, like Samuel was. Samuel's mother offered him to the priest, and he was raised in the temple and became this amazing prophet and judge. And that was what was meant for Jesus too. So my main point is that they disappeared from the scene, and there's no mention of them afterwards. Whereas if they would have continued to recognize who Jesus was, things would have gone completely different. And then another person, Mary. Sorry to say this, but she failed in some major ways. She also was given this great revelation. And yet, like us, like Zechariah, like Elizabeth, like so many of us, God speaks to us. But then we start doubting it because it's just too difficult. It's just too difficult to put it into practice. So, can you imagine, Mary's given this revelation, and then, she goes back with her husband Joseph, and then she has other kids. It's difficult to keep that revelation. But if she really understood, she should have just, ideally, she should have just raised him as her only child because he was so special. And ideally, he should have been raised in the temple by Zechariah himself. And there's a couple verses that just really show clearly how far she had drifted in her understanding of Jesus. There's a passage in Luke 2:41-52 when Jesus was 12 and disappeared, or they lost him, and it says that Mary and Joseph had forgotten him, and then once they realized, then they came back to find him. They looked around for 3 days, and finally, they went to the temple. And this is and Mary was so upset, that she chastises him for making them worry so much. And this is what Jesus says at the age of 12. How is it that you sought me? Do you not know that I must be in my Father's house? He knew that he was meant to be there. And why wasn't that the first place that they went to look for them? Instead, They went everywhere else but the temple to look for him. And there's another passage that shows. Oh, and then it goes on to say, and they did not understand the saying which he spoke to them. So they just didn't really get it. Why is he talking this way to me? And then there's the instance in the Bible when they're invited to a wedding and he's asked to make wine. And John says to Mary, "Oh, woman, what have you to do with me? My hour has not come." Can you imagine calling your mother woman? Maybe that would happen today, but not back then where, there's total respect for the elders. And yet he calls his mother, "Woman, what have you to do with me? My hour has not come." Maybe Jesus knew the most important wedding is meant to be his. And was she preparing for that? No. And there's, in the principal book, there's a whole chapter on John the Baptist. He also had this huge revelation where the dove appeared and he testified to Jesus at that time who he was. But then, do we see any record of John actually following Jesus? No. And it actually talks about how later some of the disciples, they were getting really confused because here's John the Baptist baptizing people in this part of the river, and then down the river is Jesus. And it's just causing confusion in the disciples. And again, it's John the Baptist had lost faith. Could you imagine John? Everybody knew about John, and he must have had so many followers. But can you imagine if John had totally united with Jesus and brought all of these followers to him? It would have been a completely different story. And yet John lost faith. And Jesus talks about him later. He says, and actually, so John the Baptist ends up just getting involved in the business of Herod. And he gets his head chopped off. But while he's in prison, waiting for his death, I can imagine, he knows he's going to die, so he's thinking to himself, I wonder if my life could have been different. So he sends two of his disciples to go ask Jesus, "Are you the one who is to come?" Because he had totally lost faith. And then after these disciples left, Jesus says, "I tell you, among those born of women, none is greater than John, yet he who is least in the kingdom of God is greater than he." If John would have united with Jesus, would he be the least in the kingdom? No, he'd be number two. He wouldn't be the least. Anyway, there's a lot more. And I would love to share more of these teachings with you through a series of classes. But throughout the whole story of Jesus, you can see how there was just like one failure after another failure after another failure. And at the same time, God is just working so hard and desperately. Even at the manger, all of these people should have been there. And where was Mary's parents? Something was going on. Mary's parents were there. Her family wasn't there. Zechariah was there. So then God has to reach out to all the shepherds. Hey, somebody wake up. My son is being born. But what power did they have? And also God has been working tirelessly. Throughout history, God had prepared his people, the Israelites, for hundreds of years for this moment, and yet they missed their moment. So my question for you is that when God speaks to you and gives you understanding and revelations or whatever, are you going to listen to it, or are you going to just kind of let it slip away because, that happened a long time ago. Maybe it was something else. And I believe that today, when Christ comes in the same way, people were just so caught up in looking at the law that they totally missed him. So now, the Christians, similarly to Jesus, they were expecting Isaiah the prophet. Was it Isaiah? I think it's Isaiah. No, not Isaiah. They were expecting Elijah the prophet to come down in a chariot of fire, but he didn't come that way. And in Zechariah's revelation, he was told that John the Baptist was coming in the spirit, in the power. So Elijah was going to be working with him. And I believe the same thing is going to happen today. Christ is going to come, but people are going to be looking up at the clouds. And Jesus himself said, will he find faith on earth? He said that he'll come like a thief in the night and will suffer many things. Do you think that would happen to Christ if he comes again, if he comes on the clouds? I don't think so. I think it's going to be quiet behind the scenes.